Okay, this circuit we're going to look at today is the effects of opens and shorts in circuits and what happens to resistance, current, and voltage. So let's take a look at this first here. As you can see over here, I've got an open here. And I've got 120 volts applied, and I have an open here. And as we know, well, current can't flow in an open. So I have an open circuit, current won't flow. There's no path for current to flow, so no current's going to flow. So if we look at our voltages here, we say, okay, well, if I was to take a look at the voltage here, what do we think that would be? Well, if I had a meter and I was checking from this point here to this point here, really that point is the positive side of the battery because it's closed. The circuit is closed all the way to there. And then this portion here, I'm really reading to this open. I'm never getting to this power supply here. So really that would be 0 volts. And you can look at it this way. Well, if I have no current flowing in a circuit and E, the voltage, is equal to I times R, so we go E is equal to I times R, and there's 0 amps flowing in the circuit times my resistance, doesn't matter what it is, it's going to equal 0 volts. So that makes sense. So 0 volts there, 0 volts there. So we look at this and we go, okay, well, if my sum of my voltage drops around a closed loop must equal my total applied, but given that this is an open, my meter is going to see some voltage here. It's going to see this potential here and this potential over here. So across my voltage here across this open is going to equal the applied, in other words, 120 volts. And again, you can look at it from this perspective and say, well, that if the sum of the individual voltage drops equals the total voltage applied, and across the open I've got 0 volts here, 0 volts here, but across the open I've got 120 volts. Well, that kind of makes sense given that the sum of the voltage drops must equal the total applied. Recognize that there is no current flowing, and if there's no current flowing, I'm not going to get a voltage drop here or here, so all the voltage is going to be dropped across the open because I can see this side of the circuit, and from this point I can see this side of the circuit. So as a result of this, an open, my resistance really increases. If I was to measure my resistance from here to here, my resistance really would increase. And it would increase to an infinite value, wouldn't it? It would increase to an infinite value because my meter is going to read it to this point, and then on the other side it's going to read it to this point. So really it's like having those two meter leads not even touching anything. So it has an infinite value of resistance. And if I have an infinite value of resistance, then my current must be 0. So my current drops down from what it normally would be if this had been closed, drops down to 0. And if my power is a function of my voltage times my current is 0, then my power must also drop down to 0. Now if we take a look at this one over here, this is a shorted circuit over here. We go, okay, well, I've got 100 ohms here, 100 ohms here, and 100 ohms here. But this 100 ohms here, from this point here to this point here, it's been shorted. So I have a piece of wire that's dropped across this circuit and it's shorted out. This piece of wire I'm not showing any resistance to. This over here has 100 ohms of resistance, and current will always follow the path of least resistance. So it's like this doesn't even exist from there to there, in which case I would drop from 300 ohms down to 200 ohms. So I'd have a decrease in resistance, and if I have a decrease in resistance, then my current, which would normally be which would normally be 400 milliamps, would increase to 600 milliamps. So I would get an increase in current. And my power, as a result of an increase in current, at 300, my power total in a short is going to go from, normally it would be 400 milliamps times 120 volts. And under this circumstance, we've got 600 milliamps at 120 volts. So my total power in this particular circuit is going to increase. I have an increase in current. And we know that power is equal to my voltage times my current. And if my current increases, my total power is going to increase as well. Now, if we take a look at the voltage across a shorted circuit, if I was to measure the voltage across this resistor here, from here to here, I would read 0 volts. I mean, you have to think, there's no current flowing through this area here. Now, if I was to say, okay, well, let's take the voltage across this shorted portion of the circuit, well, that's going to equal 0 as well. And the reason it's going to equal 0 is because, well, there's no potential difference between these two. I mean, it's just like taking your voltmeter and having your leads come out like this out of your voltmeter and touching them together. Well, there's no potential difference between those two, so I'm going to have 0 volts across the shorted circuit, across the shorted portion of the circuit. Now, if I take a look at the voltage across here, from here to here, well, that's just going to be a function of whatever my Ohm's law value is. I got 100 ohms here, I got 100 ohms here, 120 volts there, I got 60 volts there. So it stands to reason I'm going to have 60 volts here as well, and 0 volts there. 60 plus the 60 equals my 120. So in a shorted circuit, the value of the voltage across the open is going to equal the applied voltage in an open circuit. And in a shorted circuit, the value of the voltage across the portion that is shorted out is going to equal 0. And the other values of voltage across the circuit that is not shorted will make up the difference in terms of the voltage.